There is one piece of evidence in the Nolan Wells case that could end all of this. Not the audio everybody's fighting about. Something quieter. Something that's been sitting in a state office in Mississippi this whole time. Never released. Never independently examined. Never explained to the family still waiting on it. The experts say it might be the single thing that finally tells us how this 18-year-old really died. So here's the question I need you to hold on to for the next few minutes. If that answer already exists, why won't they let anybody see it? We're going to walk through everything that happened this week. An arrest, a completed autopsy, an audio recording that fell apart under the science, and by the end, you're going to understand exactly why that one locked away piece matters more than all of it. Stay with me. If you are staying with us, take a second right now and hit subscribe so you don't miss where this goes next. And while you are here, tell us on the comment where in the world you are watching from. It matters to us to know how far this story have reached, and we read every single one. Quick note before we get into it. Same as always. This case is active. No cause of death has been confirmed. Everything here comes from official records, charging documents, and public statements. And this week especially, I'm going to be careful to separate what's been confirmed from what's just spreading online. Because a lot spread this week, and not all of it held up. If you're new here, 4 sentences to catch you up. 18-year-old Nolan Wells went to Horn Island for the 4th of July with a group of friends. When they left, Nolan stayed behind, and 2 days later, he was found in the water. The public was told no foul play before a single autopsy was done. His family never accepted that. An independent autopsy came back undetermined, and the whole country's been watching ever since. Now, this week. Let's start with the arrest because it is not what you think. For weeks, this case had produced no arrests. None. Thousands of people on that island the day Nolan died. A boat full of friends, and not one person charged with anything connected to his death. Then, this week, the FBI made an arrest, and for 1 second, it looked like the break everybody had been praying for. Federal agents, a real charge, somebody in handcuffs. But hold on, because the man they arrested was never on that boat, never had Nolan's phone, wasn't the last person seen with him, wasn't even in the state of Mississippi. He was in Sacramento, California. His name is Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Duma, and he was not charged with anything having to do with how Nolan Wells died. He was charged with a federal crime, interstate transmission of a threatening communication, up to 5 years in prison. So who was he threatening? And what does he have to do with any of this? Here's the connection. Remember Warren, Nolan's friend, the one who spoke on that podcast, the one whose account we've covered before? Warren's stepmother is a Jackson County judge. Her name is Ashley Cole. And as this case blew up online, as millions of people picked sides, Judge Cole started receiving threats. Not vague, angry comments, specific, violent threats, sent through Facebook from an account investigators later traced back to Dumas, out in California. And I want to be careful here, because these messages are genuinely disturbing, and I'm not going to sit in them. But you need to understand what got this man arrested. The messages talked about a package coming to her office. They referenced a bomb. They referenced blood, and made a point of tying it to a boat. They threatened her children by name with pictures. That is what the FBI moved on. And I'll say plainly, threatening a woman's kids like that is indefensible. Whatever anybody believes about this case, that's not advocacy. That's terrorism against a family, and the arrest for it is legitimate. But here's where a whole lot of people online stopped and said, wait a minute. Because look at how fast that worked. A man hides behind a fake username, sends messages from another state, thousands of miles away, And federal agents tracked the email, the IP address, the date of birth, the phone number, the addresses, and they put him in handcuffs. Days. That's how long it took. And then people turned around and looked at Nolan's case. Thousands of witnesses on that island. Phones, a boat, circumstantial evidence people have been pointing at for weeks. And after all of it, not one charge. Not one arrest connected to his death. So the questions started going around, and I'm going to say it the way people are saying it, because it's fair to ask. How is it that they can move that fast when they want to, but weeks into an 18-year-old turning up dead, there's still nothing? Now, I'm going to be straight with you. There's a real answer to that, and it's not as satisfying as the frustration. A threat sent over the internet is a clean, contained crime. One sender, one digital trail, easy to prove. A death with thousands of people around, conflicting stories, and contested evidence is a completely different kind of case to build, and rushing it is exactly how you lose it later. Both of those things are true. The frustration is understandable, and the explanation is real. You can hold both. Make it make sense, or at least hold the discomfort of it, because that's honest. That's the arrest. Nobody charged in Nolan's death. One man charged for terrorizing a family over it. Moving on, because the bigger story this week is what happened to the evidence everybody thought they understood. Let me take you back to the thing that drove this entire case for weeks. The audio. The distress call from that sinking boat. The one where people swore they could hear a name, Nolan, and a phrase in the background that convinced millions something terrible had already happened on that boat before it ever left the island. That recording is the reason a lot of you are even watching this case. It went everywhere. It shaped how the whole country saw this story. And this week, for the first time, somebody finally did. The one thing almost nobody had done. They ran it through the actual science. Here's what you have to understand about that viral clip. It was not the raw original recording. The original was released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. And honestly, when it first came out, it barely got any attention. Just background noise on an emergency call. Then TMZ got a version, ran it through audio enhancement, cleaned it up, and published that. And the enhanced one is the one that took off. The one everybody was slowing down, looping, straining to hear a name in.
CETO Assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you? All right, of course. How far is the word coming up, sir?
No, we do not need that.
All right.
Oh, let the go. No, we do not need that.
Then a digital forensics expert went on News Nation and did something different. He got the original file, the one from Mississippi authorities, and he put it right next to the enhanced version TMZ had put out. Not listening by ear, comparing them frame by frame, second by second, with the tools of his actual profession, and what he found was not small. The enhanced version, the viral one, ran a full 20 seconds longer than the original. 20 seconds. And beyond the length, the two files carried completely different digital signatures. In plain terms, the version that went viral had been processed and changed in a way that separated it from the source it supposedly came from. Then he said the part that matters most. He could not corroborate a single one of the phrases people online believed they'd heard. Not the name. Not the phrase that fueled the biggest theory in this entire case. None of it held up when you measured it against the actual original file. And there's one more layer. Even that original from Mississippi had already been partially redacted before the public ever heard it, identifying details stripped out for privacy, which means the truly untouched, unaltered recording has never been made public, not once, by anybody. Let me be clear about what this does and doesn't mean, because this is the part people are going to get twisted. This does not mean nothing happened to Nolan. It does not clear anybody. It does not close this case. What it means is that the loudest piece of evidence in this entire story, the thing that convinced millions, may have been people hearing what they came in expecting to hear inside a file that had already been altered. On top of that, there's now a claim going around that federal investigators secretly identified whose voice is on that tape. And I have to flag it plainly. That claim is unconfirmed. No agency has said it. No named source. It's spreading anyway, but it has not been confirmed. And I'm not going to treat it like it has been. So if the loudest thing in this case doesn't hold up, then the real question becomes what the confirmed evidence says. The stuff investigators can actually stand behind. And that takes us straight to the thing I opened with. The completed autopsy, the grand jury, and the one piece of evidence still locked in a state office that everything now depends on. That's part 2. Don't go anywhere. So let's get to the thing everybody's been waiting on since the very first day of this case. The state's autopsy is complete. Mississippi's own medical examiner conducted it on July 7th, one day after Nolan's body was pulled from the water. That's the earliest, closest look anybody got. And for weeks, it sat unfinished, or at least unreleased, while the whole country argued in the dark. Now it's done. ABC News confirmed it. NBC confirmed it. And here's the catch. The results have not been made public. Not to you, not to the press. And as far as we know, not even fully to Nolan's family. Instead, that report is going somewhere specific. It's going to a grand jury. Now, if you don't know what a grand jury actually is, stay with me, because this part matters more than it sounds. A grand jury isn't a trial. Nobody's being convicted. What a grand jury does is decide one thing, whether there's enough evidence to charge somebody with a crime in the first place. If they say yes, you get an indictment, and the case moves forward. If they say no, it stops right there. So think about what that means for this case. If that grand jury comes back with an indictment, it tells you the state's autopsy pointed toward foul play, enough that a prosecutor thought somebody should answer for it. And if it comes back with nothing, that tells you the state's examination didn't find enough to charge anyone. Either way, this is the door. Everything Nolan's family has been fighting for walks through this one room. But here's where a lot of folks got uneasy. And I'm going to lay it out fair because it's a real concern with a real other side. A grand jury only hears one voice, the prosecutor's. There's no defense attorney in that room. Nobody standing up to say objection. Nobody offering a different version of events. The people who testify don't even get their own lawyer with them. It is entirely the prosecutor's show, their questions, their evidence, the story they choose to tell. Now, some legal folks will tell you that's exactly how it's supposed to work. It's just a filter to decide if a case has legs, not the final judgment. Fair enough. But others, including a judge who spoke publicly about this very case, said plainly that it all comes down to how hard the prosecutor decides to push. Present it strong, you get a charge. Present it soft, you don't. And in a state with the history Mississippi has, a lot of people here trust the prosecutor and feel a way about it. Not because the process is automatically corrupt, but because they've seen how this movie has ended before. Both sides of that are real. The process is standard, and the worry is understandable. Hold both. Now, the thing I opened this whole video with, the quiet piece, the one sitting in a state office right now, here's what it actually is. When the family got their own independent autopsy, done by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and president of the National Medical Association, Mitchell was not working from a clean slate. The state had already gone first, and when the state does its examination, sometimes it keeps certain material for its own continued investigation. One of the things the state kept came from the front of Nolan's neck, the internal structures of the neck, the exact tissue a pathologist relies on to tell whether there was any injury to that area. Mitchell noted in his written report that this material was never sent to him. He couldn't examine it. It wasn't there. And Mitchell was careful. He said retaining material like that isn't unusual. It's a known common practice, especially when there's reason to look closer at a specific area. He wasn't accusing anybody of hiding anything. He was documenting what he did and did not have in front of him. But because that material wasn't available to him, Mitchell hit a wall. And in his report, he wrote the line that has driven this entire case ever since. He could not rule out injury to the neck as a cause of, or a contributor to, Nolan's death. Sit with that for a second. He couldn't rule it in, but he couldn't rule it out either, because the one part of the body that would answer the question wasn't on his table. Now, other forensic experts, people with no connection to this case at all, went on national TV and explained why that specific gap matters so much. And I need you to hear exactly how careful they were, because this is where people online run way past the facts. One medical examiner explained that the structures in that part of the neck are exactly what a pathologist looks at when trying to determine whether strangulation played any role in a death. Without them, she said, a second autopsy is limited. It can't give you real, conclusive answers, no matter how good the rest of the work is. Let me be crystal clear about what that does and does not say, because this is the whole point. Nobody said Nolan was strangled, not Mitchell, not the outside experts. Nobody. What they said, carefully, specifically, is that the one piece of material capable of answering that question, one way or the other, was never made available for independent review. That's it. That's the claim, not a conclusion, a gap where a conclusion should be. And here's the part that keeps people up at night. That material wasn't destroyed. It wasn't lost. According to Mitchell's own report, it's preserved, sitting inside the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's office right now, retained, not released, which means the answer to one of the most serious questions in this entire case, whether there's any sign of injury to that area at all, already exists, in some form. It just hasn't been handed to anybody trying to find the truth from outside the system. So the question I asked you to hold on to at the very top, here it is again, and now you understand it. If that answer already exists, why won't they let anybody see it? I said what I said. That's the box. That's the whole case in one sentence. There was a second thing in Mitchell's report, and it got its own attention. During his examination, he documented an area of discoloration in the tissue at the back of Nolan's head. He was careful about it. No fractures, no breaks in the skin. He called the cause of it unclear, and he left it right there. Didn't speculate. An outside expert looking at that same detail offered one possibility among several, that if trauma were ever confirmed in that area, it could be consistent with a physical injury. And yes, strangulation was named as one possibility among others. But same rule applies. Nobody confirmed trauma. Nobody confirmed an injury. It's an unexplained mark that the pathologist himself refused to guess about. I'm not going to guess for him. Now let me clean up one more thing from the last update, because it turns out it wasn't as simple as it looked. Remember that early document that listed Nolan's drinking that day as heavy? A lot of people grabbed that word and ran, treated it like the whole explanation. Case closed. He was drunk. He drowned. Well, a board-certified forensic pathologist named Dr. Judy Melinek, no connection to this case, nothing to gain either way, walked through why that word can't carry that much weight. Here's the thing most people don't know. When a body isn't recovered right away, the body can start producing alcohol on its own, naturally, as a byproduct, completely separate from anything the person actually drank. So Melanek's point was this: if toxicology eventually shows alcohol in Nolan's system, you cannot just take that number at face value. It doesn't automatically mean he was drinking heavily. It has to be read in context. How long the body was in the water, everything? Or that number tells you a story that isn't true. That's not me defending anybody. That's a forensic expert saying a preliminary field note got treated as a settled fact when the science says it's a lot more complicated than that. So look where we are now. The audio that drove this case, undercut. The heavy drinking shortcut, complicated by the science. And the one piece of evidence that could actually answer the biggest question, locked in a state office, preserved, unreleased. Every loud thing got quieter this week, and the one quiet thing got a whole lot louder. That's where the family comes in, because this week they stood up in front of the country again, and they announced they're bringing in their own experts to go after the two questions the state won't answer, including one about the tides that I had not heard before. And honestly, it's the detail that stuck with me most. That's part 3. Don't skip it. This week, Nolan's parents stood in front of the country one more time. It happened at the National Urban League Conference, with attorney Ben Crump beside them, and a room full of other parents, other mothers and fathers who've lost young black sons and are still waiting on answers of their own. And when Christine and Elmore Wells spoke, they weren't there to point fingers. They were there to make one thing clear. Christine put it simply: they are not trying to cast blame on anyone. They want the truth. And as she said, if that truth implicates you or clears you, that's between you and your God. But the truth is what they came for, and nothing less. Elmore said the same, in his own words. If Nolan was really your friend, if you were on that island, come forward. Tell them what you know. They're not blaming anyone. They just want to understand what happened to their son. That's the whole ask. Still, after everything. But there was pain underneath it that they didn't hide. Because while this family has been begging for the truth, people have been attacking them. And I mean that literally. Christine has been a nurse for years, and Crump said people have been going onto her employer's website leaving fake negative reviews, trying to damage her at work, all because she dared to ask what happened to her own child. Let that land. A mother buries her son, asks the public for help finding the truth, and strangers respond by trying to get her fired. And it's not only them. Remember, the other family in this story has been getting threats too. Real ones. That's what the arrest we talked about was even about. So you've got two families on opposite sides of the country's suspicion, both living in fear, both getting attacked by strangers online who've decided they already know everything. Elmore said it plain. A parent can't even grieve when people are attacking them, attacking their jobs, attacking their character. Where's the empathy at? That was his question, and it's a fair one. Now here's what the family did beyond just speaking. Crump announced they're not waiting on Mississippi anymore. They brought in their own teams. First, audio engineers, some of the top experts in the field retained to go through that CETO call in its entirety. Given everything we just covered about that recording being altered, that move makes complete sense. They want the real file analyzed by people who do this for a living, not the internet. But the second team is the one that stopped me. They brought in oceanic engineering experts, tide experts, and here's why. The story is that Nolan stayed behind on the island, and that his body was later found in the water in roughly the same area where his friends say they left him. And Crump's question is this: how is that possible? Because tides move. Water doesn't hold a body in place for 2 days. You've got high tide, low tide, currents pulling in and out. So if Nolan went into that water where they say the tides should have carried him, the fact that he was found close to where he was supposedly last seen, according to the family's experts, that doesn't line up with how the ocean actually works. I'm not an oceanographer. I can't tell you they're right. But let me tell you something. That is a sharp question. And it's the kind of question that doesn't come from emotion. It comes from science. It's exactly the kind of thing that either gets explained cleanly or it doesn't. And right now, it hasn't. So here's where this case really stands tonight, once you strip away everything that fell apart this week. The arrest wasn't about Nolan's death. It was about protecting a family from threats. The audio that convinced millions doesn't hold up against the science. The heavy drinking line is more complicated than anybody admitted. The state autopsy is done, but sealed, and headed for a grand jury behind closed doors. And the one piece of evidence that could answer the biggest question of all, the neck tissue, is still sitting preserved in a state office, unreleased. 2 full autopsies, weeks of national attention, 100 federal agents when they wanted to move, and this family still does not have the one thing they've asked for since day one: an answer. Not a verdict handed down ahead of the facts. Just the evidence that already exists, the stuff sitting in official files right now, finally shared with the people trying to find the truth about their son. That's all they've ever asked for. And it's still the one thing they don't have. This case is not finished, and neither is our coverage of it. The moment that grand jury moves, the moment that autopsy report or that retained material or the full toxicology finally sees daylight, we'll be right back here, breaking it down the same way we always do. What's confirmed, what's not, and no jumping ahead of the evidence. That's the promise. And on this case, especially, it matters. If you want to be here when that answer finally comes, and it will come, subscribe and turn on notifications so you get it here first, laid out straight. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Of everything that landed this week, the arrest, the audio falling apart, that sealed autopsy, or that question about the tides, which one moved the needle for you the most? And where do you think this goes next? Drop it below. We read every single one, and your comments genuinely shape where we take this. This is Beyond Dark Cases, where we stay with the forgotten and the recent, the disappearances and the unanswered, long after everybody else has moved on. Until the next confirmed update, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you back here.